And now, a word from
Infirmary Media.
Hey dudes and dudettes, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Be Kind and Rewind podcast, a podcast chock full of topics about the 80s, 90s, and more with retro celebrity interviews and fact-filled movie commentaries. I'm your host, Carlos, and this episode, I'm joined by the man who's been sculpting and designing puppets and toys for over 30 years with the Jim Henson Company, Sesame Street, The Dark Crystal, along with toy lines such as Boglins, Sectaurs, and his most recent line of TOTIMS. So I welcome Tim Clarke to the podcast.
Hello.
Well, reaching out to see, just kind of catch up on what you've been up to recently. It's a toy and Comic-Con convention time, so I'm sure you've been busy doing some things like that in one way or another.
Yeah, I started doing them. Gosh, I had maybe 3 years ago because the guys out in West Virginia in Parkersburg, Classic Plastics. I guess saw some of my stuff on Instagram and contacted me and wanted to know if I would be interested in coming out there to do one of their Comic-Con shows. And that got the ball rolling. It's like once I did one, then people were like, "Oh, you're available? Okay, we'll come and do one of ours." So that started it. Plus, getting back into doing the designer toy scene with a gallery show at Toy Art Gallery and then also at Clutter Gallery in Beacon, New York, and doing limited edition pieces and one-of-a-kind pieces. And so that's what I've been doing lately, just knocking stuff out like crazy.
Yeah, so what was your reaction when you start going to the Comic-Cons and start, seeing people come out of the woodwork and showing their appreciation?
Well, I knew there was a big following for Dark Crystal, even more so now with the new series coming out on Netflix. And also people who followed Fraggle Rock. My work on Muppet Show and Sesame Street is kind of less known, but, there's a big fan base there. And so it's nice to, meet people at the shows and get feedback from them on, what I've done and what I'm doing. And so far it's been really a wonderful experience. And I really appreciate the people who have been following me. It's been really good.
Well, that's awesome to hear. So what's the next one that you're looking to attend?
I'm doing 5 Points in Brooklyn, June 1st and 2nd. And I'm going to have some new Boglin stuff there. I'm going to have the new Kid Robot Fraggles. And let's see. I think that's pretty much it. But I'm hoping to have like 3 or 4 new Boglin pieces when I get there.
Well, nice. So custom, like originals, one-offs, I guess.
I will have some one-offs, and then I have some that'll be like small edition series. The advantage of coming to the shows is that you can get stuff signed, which is always nice. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I've been up to lately, and just trying to keep up with the orders that I get online and doing the shows at the same time, which sometimes I get a little backed up, but I do the best I can to get stuff out.
Well, it sounds like some good problems to have, but yeah, you might need to get yourself an assistant here before too long.
Yeah, no, I have hired some person part-time to try and make it so that I can spend a little more time sculpting, because it got to the point where I was just producing so much that I didn't have time to sculpt new product lines. So, yep, that's the way to go. It's just building it slowly and carefully and not trying to rush anything or, get overwhelmed with what I'm doing. So.
Well, hopefully we'll see you in Denver before long.
Yeah, that would be. I am supposed to do RetroCon, I think it is, in Denver.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I went to the last one. So you're going to do the next one coming up?
I hope to. We'll see. The problem is this year it conflicted with Monsterpalooza in Los Angeles. So
Understandable.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be on the lookout to see if we get an update. We might see at the next RetroCon, and we'll get everything tagged below so people can follow along and keep updated. So if they see you listed at the next Comic-Con, they can make their way down there with their Boglins or their Sectaurs or whatever toy line they have from you that they can get signed.
Yeah.
So we'll keep everybody updated. So awesome. We'll just kind of jumping into things, just starting off from the beginning. Where you first started creating puppets. As a kid. Most kids are playing Foursquare or soccer, but you're off creating puppets and performing like with your brother back in the day. So what were some of the positive and negative reactions of being a kid at your age who was, playing with puppets in that manner and creating your shows as opposed to playing soccer and all those other sports?
Well, it didn't matter what I was doing. Like even when kids in the neighborhood, when we would play Army, that's what we called it. It was playing Army. And I, with a bunch of my friends, we built a tank in my backyard out of refrigerator boxes and a pill box and a cardboard tube from a rug, from a rug warehouse. And so we were just using found objects, and then we painted it with house paint to make it look like it was camouflaged. And then, we would, have our pretend battles between, the U.S. and the Nazis. That was the big thing because we were all post World War II babies then. So, and then my brother and I used to do both puppet shows for the neighborhood kids to make money. And the other big thing is that we would turn our garage into a haunted house every year. And, the kids would pay 25 cents to come in and see all the crazy stuff we would make in the haunted house. So
what were some of the cool things you put like spaghetti on the floor or something like that? Or what were some of your specialties?
We would peel grapes and then
eyeballs, stepping on eyeballs, all that good stuff.
Yeah, put magic marker on them to make them look like eyeballs. And we would have a head floating in a frame. And
so you guys went all out. You weren't just the run-of-the-mill haunted house. You went all out, especially for garage. So you had like a little maze kind of carved out.
You had to walk through. We would just hang up dark sheets. So you had to walk, from one end of the garage to the other and out. And you would see all the different things. And then we would just have, like Wolfman costumes and stuff like that to scare the kids.
Were you using mom and dad as props or as
jumping
out to scare people?
My parents just let us go. He said, "You go do your thing." They wouldn't get involved.
They were separate, but they let you have your thing. Yeah, that's as most parents probably would. Yeah, that's funny. That's awesome. And you kind of had your own little following, like in the neighborhood or like in the local town type of thing.
I mean, we had quite a reputation. Like if like. How brave are you, and can you make it all the way through the haunted house at the Clarke's house?
So it was the go-to haunted house for Halloween. Then nice,
yes,
awesome. Well, your love of puppets went on until you attended Pratt, where you were in Kermit Love's class, who designed Big Bird and Snuffleupagus. Tell me about how. I guess it was hard for you to get into that class. What made it so hard to get into the class?
Well, the class was very popular, and preference was given to theater majors. So everybody else, if they were outside of the theater department, usually you didn't get in until your senior year, and I didn't get in until my last semester of my senior year.
You should have pulled a Steven Spielberg and like sat in a corner underneath somebody's desk for 3 semesters or something and get all that extra info.
Yeah. No, it just, I had the feeling that I would get in eventually because, they would tell you like where you were in the listing of preference. So, no, and it was an amazing experience, and I was determined to outdo everybody else in the class. And the funny thing is that the theater majors were, not necessarily craftspeople. So they, the stuff that they were making was maybe, more crude or rudimentary.
They were more about the performance, whereas you wanted to create, the piece, the art piece.
Right. And so people from the design, the art and design school were much more, adept at producing things. And Kermit just really liked my approach, that I wasn't just trying to make another Muppet, that I was doing other things with my hands and my body to create the movement in the puppet itself. So, just before the semester ended, he said to me, "What are you doing when you graduate?" And I said, "Well, I'm majoring in art education. I'm looking for a teaching job." But at that time, it was like the baby boom generation and trying to teach to the following generation, which was actually very small in comparison. So there weren't really a lot of teaching jobs out there. So he said to me, "Why don't you come and work, for me?" And I didn't hesitate at all. I was like, "Yes, definitely."
And so that's when you jumped onto Sesame Street. Is that right?
Yes. The Kermit did basically three things. He made Sesame Street characters for other places around the world to kind of mimic Big Bird and Oscar. So in Mexico, there was a giant parrot rather than a big bird, and I'm trying to remember what the other character was.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, was like when you guys were creating the characters, because it was like in Mexico, Germany, and Kuwait, I believe, were some of the countries. Yeah. And so, you incorporated the culture into some of the characters. So I wonder how in depth you guys went into that.
That was totally up to Kermit, what he wanted to design. I know for Germany, we did a bear as the large character and a bird. And for Kuwait, it was, I don't even know what to call him. Noaman was like kind of like a bear, but very abstract. And then we had a parrot that was one of the, I worked on both the characters, but the parrot I probably did more work on than other things. And no, Kermit did that, and then he would do puppets for TV commercials, and he would do costume design for a lot of the ballet companies, like New York City Ballet. We did a 24-foot high marionette for Don Quixote, the ballet, and that was all like accordioned into the floor, and it would just spring up out of the floor. And it was quite amazing. It was a really impressive piece.
How often would you guys get involved in like production sets like that?
It was working for Kermit. It was totally erratic. It's like, and from like the first fall that I was working for him, I worked as a puppet wrangler on Sesame Street, just getting puppets that were already made, ready to appear. And then, then we did the recreation of the Picasso costumes for Parade, which was a Joffrey ballet. I think that had originally been done by the Ballet Russe. And then, then we would have downtime. Like I might have like 3 weeks when there wasn't any work at all. And then I would make my own puppets in my spare time, while I was waiting, to make some more money and for Kermit to find work.
You're like a painter. You got to keep up with the art. You got to keep doing things, keep practicing.
Right. It was up and down. It was up and down. And after a year of that, I was like, still living at home and commuting to New York City every day. And I was like getting a little stir crazy because I wasn't making enough to live on.
But you're living the dream, and right? That's what you keep telling yourself the whole time.
Well, no, it was getting to be torturous. in some ways, because I was like, I don't want to be living in my parents' house forever. So
that does raise a lot of perspective for people. So yeah, understandable.
yeah. So I went to meet Kermit at Pratt because he was teaching that fall again, and I was standing outside of his classroom, and he finished class, and I turned, just to walk in the door, and he said, "Oh, I'm so glad you came today." He said, Jim is starting, and I was going to go ask him for a recommendation to, get an interview with Jim. And he saw me and just said, "Oh, Jim is starting up this new project, and I think you'd be really good for it. And you haven't, I've set up an interview for you next Thursday." And I was just like, oh my God, it's like he's reading my mind. I don't know. Yeah, it was just incredible luck and timing. And I gathered together all the puppets that I had been making while I was at Pratt, and also while I was in my downtime working for Kermit. And I went up the following Thursday with all my puppets in garbage bags because I didn't know what else to put them in.
It sounds like an SNL audition. You're bringing all your props with you to the audition, making sure you got everything. Yeah. And Jim really liked what I was doing because I was, like I said, I had done a crab which used both my hands, and my thumbs were the eyeballs and my fingers were the legs. And I had made a hard shell over the top of it, and he would scurry across the desktop. And then I had done the fly puppet, which were also, my fingers were the legs of the fly, and my middle finger was the nose or the proboscis or whatever you call it of the fly, and the eyes were attached to that. So as I moved my middle finger, the eyes would, move around. And I had combined fur fabrics with like this very metallic sheer fabric, and also some other, it's not lace, but for the wings, I found this material in Kermit's shop, which was a crisscross pattern of very fine netting that had a red-green sheen to it when it hit the light. So it alternated in the thread count between the red and the green. So it really looked like an insect wing. It had that iridescent quality to it. Well, look, like you sound like you're very resourceful, and that's the thing. That's what Jim and Kermit picked up on. You're resourceful, and you can come up with these real super creative puppets. It's a little bit different from what they're normally used to.
Well, Jim just said to me basically what Kermit had said to me, when I was in his class. He said, Jim said to me, "I really like that you're using your hands in different ways, and you're using your whole body rather than just, using your hand to move the mouth." And so after I showed him everything, and he said, "Okay, so when can you start?" And I said, "Tomorrow." He just laughed. He said, "No," he said, "I have to talk to HR." And then he said, "Why don't you come back next Tuesday and we'll have paperwork for you to sign, and, you can start then." And I said, "Okay, great." And that was working on Dark Crystal.
So that was the project that he was working on then.
Yep. And we started in New York, and we were in New York for almost a year working on it, just doing development work. And Jim had Dick Smith come in to teach us how to work with foam latex and how to sculpt and mold to cast foam latex. And that was amazing. Dick was a wonderful person. He was very giving with all his knowledge and his concepts and his approach to working with the material. And so it was an incredible, learning experience on so many levels, from mold making to sculpting to working with foam latex, and then figuring out ways to make mechanisms to move the foam latex. Because Dick because he was doing prosthetic makeup, you're just working off her facial movement. And he was just so amazed by the things we were doing. He said, this is so much better because you have so much greater expression using your hand and the variety of movement you can do with your hand rather than the limits of your face and your jaw, moving basically. So it was a great experience, and Dick learned new things from us, and we learned all this great stuff from Dick. So
you guys were working with the mystics and like the slave design primarily, is that right?
Well, I started out working on the mystics. The original mystic had been sculpted by somebody else it basically had been carved out of a solid block of urethane foam, and they left because they wanted to concentrate on their own work. They didn't want to be working at Muppets any longer. So the mystics were handed off to me and Sherry Amott, and Sherry was doing the costume side, and I was sculpting all the heads and making the molds and, helping Tom McLaughlin cast them in foam latex because Tom was working in the foam shop. And, it's like just a back and forth between everybody and working on the mechanisms for the hands for the mystics and all kinds of stuff. And then that fall we did, a basic shoot, which I think is on YouTube, in Jim's backyard. He was living in Bedford, New York at that time. And so we just all went up for a weekend and we just shot some, test pieces that Jim used to, help get funding for the movie itself, to show people that it was just going to be totally different from anything Muppets had done before.
And it was one of the first full-length films with no humans, is that right?
Well, yes, I guess in a way, yes, but the thing is, like, stop motion animation
true.
Puppets have been done, for a long time with.
I guess it's more like a baseball stat. It's got that little, like, tiny little window that it can be in there, where it's for the full length version, like you're talking about. So when you guys are creating, the mystics and all these other characters, do you have an idea of what the story is going to be like when you're doing all this, or what's your expectations while like creating these characters?
Well, Jim was actually writing the story. I mean, he had a basic outline of what it was, but they were writing the story. I mean, even after a year when we went to England, he was still working on the story while we were in England. And the company at that time was so small that we sat in on the script meetings. So we were involved in the process. And it was a nice give and take because, the writers were watching us build the puppets, and so they were adapting what the characters could do based on what we were creating. So it's a very unusual circumstance, which I don't think probably anybody does or had done in character development of it, going back and forth between the writers and the people creating the puppets. So, I mean, it's just like when we got to England, one of the guys who was hired to puppeteer the Mystics was also a stilt walker. And he came in with his stilts one day and said, wouldn't it be great to create, this large creature that walked around with very long legs, like a giraffe? And we said, yeah, that's awesome. So, then everybody just got busy with Brian Proud and looking at ways that we could make this creature, run around on these long legs.
And I remember seeing I remember seeing the behind the scenes in the Blu-ray. They show you how the whole concept comes together.
Yeah, and one of the amazing things is that I think it was John Stevenson and Bob Baldwin created a pivoting foot. So it had a central foot pivot point and then two springs front and back that would compress so that guys on stilts could actually push off. It's like when you're usually walking on a stilt, it's just one single point that makes contact with the ground, so your movement is limited. And like those scenes where the land striders are running, that was real. That was not faked. And they put guy wires on them for safety, but they didn't need it. They were able to run at incredible speed in those
It is
things.
daunting because I remember watching as a kid. I'm like, how are they even doing that? And then, of course, you see the behind the scenes, and it's still daunting how those guys even kept their balance and were able to be coordinated enough to get that going. Like, it's amazing all around.
Yeah, no, but they literally had no trouble doing it. It was like because of that pivoted foot. And after that, the guy who had done the stilt walking said, "I want these on all my stilts." He's like, this is amazing, because he could literally like kind of dance around in a way he had never been able to before. So
he's unlocked the secret somehow.
Yeah, it was fascinating. It was really fascinating.
Oh, cool.
Great
Well,
stuff.
going back to when you guys were doing some of the creating the story, being part of the production, I did hear that Jim handed out copies of this book called the Seth Material, which is somewhat of an inspiration for the Dark Crystal, and handed out to all the production for everyone to kind of get a feel on what he's kind of going for. Did you get a copy of one of those books? I
never even heard of that book till more recently.
I've heard on a couple of different places. I'm not sure if it's something that
I don't know if it's something that Jim was just, that Jim had read and, gave to David Odell, who was the other writer, or, the rest of the people who are working on writing the movie. But, no, I had never even heard of it. So it wasn't that critical to
Okay, yeah, because when you're talking about you guys are part of the production or the writing, I'm like, I wonder if that was ever brought up or part of the conversation. But yeah, I had just recently heard about that, so I was like, and they went into detail about the Seth Speaks and the Seth Material, and it has definitely some connections, but he just kind of takes little bits and pieces from it.
Mm-hmm.
So then during the production, and you guys are working on the mystics and everything, was there ever like a growing fear that the movie might not work, or did everyone just keep their faith with Jim Henson and Frank on set?
Well, no, I mean, it was a great luxury for us because Jim was making money from Muppet Show and great, the Muppet movies and Great Muppet Caper, and then also from Sesame Street licensing. So there was a constant, it was a very unusual thing for a production company to have a constant flow of money that was coming in so that Jim could take his time to, do the things that he wanted. It was, and I didn't realize how unusual that was till I went to Dragon Con and Charlie Chiodo was there, and Nick Maley, who had worked on Yoda. And Charlie, was just saying, it's like, he said after Dark Crystal came out, he would go into meetings with producers, and they would say, we want to do, something just like what Jim Henson did with Dark Crystal. And he would say, you do realize that he spent 2.5 years making that movie, and he has a dedicated workshop that's all they do. And you want me to do this in 3 months? He said, it's not going to happen. So,
classic Hollywood story. Of course.
Working for Jim was a great luxury in many ways.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get into too, because a lot of us kids growing up, we only saw Jim as the voice of Kermit, among the face of Muppets, but we didn't know him, of course, as a person.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you got to work with him. So, what was him like, more on a personal level?
Jim was actually quite shy. He would, when he would come into the workshop, a lot of times he would talk in a like almost like a puppet voice. Like he would come in, well, Ben, what have you been working on today? And what have you been doing? You know, it's like it was. And we used to say that Jim had a whim of iron because he would come in like once a week because he was working at Muppet Show at the same time, and he would say, oh, like, I really like what you're doing here, but what if you did this and this and this, like, as far as my approach to sculpting the Mystic Head. And then he would go away for a week, and I would change the whole thing. And then he would come back the next week, and he'd say, what did you do? And I said, well, Jim, last time you were here, you said, why don't you try doing this and this and this? And he said, yeah, I didn't mean for you to do it, though. He said, I just
You're just talking out loud.
Think about it. And I, it's like he didn't realize the power he had, because it didn't just happen to me. It happened to like everybody who worked for him. It's like, it's Jim Henson. We were so in. I mean, a lot of the people, I think, we were so in awe of Jim and what he had accomplished and what he was doing that you didn't question what he would say to you or what he would ask of you. You went and tried to do your best to do it. So.
Probably took him a couple tries to realize the weight of his words, so he might be a little more careful if he actually wants some suggestions out there.
No, I don't think he ever did, because he liked to think out loud like that. It's part of the creative process, and he would like to think out loud, and then, it's just like everybody would be going, dramatically changing what they were working on to try and meet what Jim had talked to them about, so...
Well, it sounds like, a combination of his personality and also his time that he gave you guys a lot of creative freedom when it came to
very
creating.
much so. Yeah, and he had no problem with us, trying things out and failing and then trying something completely different. It's like he never admonished anybody for like not getting the work done or I don't remember him ever being upset or worried about, that things weren't getting done quickly enough, or there wasn't really, a tremendous amount of pressure. I mean, there were some times, like meeting deadlines for shoot dates, but when you be
he
working,
never had a Steve Jobs moment, throwing stuff at the walls and
never
throwing an engineer out the out the door.
Jim was always very soft-spoken. In fact, his assistant to the director, Dusty Simmons on Dark Crystal, we used to call Dusty Jim's professional yeller. Because Dusty would go over and Jim would whisper something in his ear, and then Dusty would turn around and yell across the soundstage, all right, you guys, so... It's like, no.
I think we all need somebody like that in our lives.
Yeah, Jim never raised his voice, never was angry. I never saw him sick in a day in his life. This is a guy who worked 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. I never saw him, never saw him sick.
Not
ever.
Working, not probably thinking about 1,000 things at one time, taking care of multiple things.
Well, because,
he just building and that legacy.
He was working on Sesame Street, flying back and forth to New York, working on Sesame Street. He was working on Muppet Show. He was working on Dark Crystal, and then working on Great Muppet Caper. All, in intervals, throughout the year, and just incredible volume of dedication and work.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. His passing was the one that they say hit you a little bit harder than most when he passed. And I was actually in L.A. this last year with some buddies. I made it a priority that we had to go stop by the Jim Henson Company studios out there, and with Kermit the Frog up in front and everything like that. It was a lifelong little dream for me to be able to at least be in front of it. We couldn't go in, of course, but to at least be there and know that a lot of the magic that we grew up enjoying was just behind those gates.
Yeah, and the
so
the LA shop was the last one to be created. It was
mainly New York was the main one?
New York was the main hub for Sesame Street and Muppet Show, and then there was a smaller shop for Muppet Show in England, and then the whole production for Dark Crystal moved there, so it got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like the workshop increased tenfold, with all the hires for Dark Crystal. And California, I don't think they started doing California until after Fraggle Rock, because when I came back to New York to do Fraggle Rock, I don't think they had California set up yet. And Fraggle Rock was shot in Toronto, so...
okay. Getting those Canadian tax breaks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, no. We'll finishing up here with Dark Crystal, like you just mentioned earlier, that they're doing a prequel series on Netflix that's supposed to be released this year. So, were you part of that production in any way?
No. They, as far as I know, they didn't ask any of the people who worked on the original movie except for Brian and Wendy. I don't know about the English crew, if any of the English crew that had been on the original worked on the new one. Why that is, I have no idea. I have no clue. And unfortunately, it's like I saw Toby at Dragon Con 2 years ago, and he said, "Tim, do you still have, like reference photographs of, the Mystics?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. I have tons of stuff that I shot while I was sculpting, so I could keep track of which one was which." And, and because I didn't want to repeat any of the swirls or designs in their faces, so, I had logged in photographs of all of them. And I said, "But your dad took a lot of photographs too." I said, "He doesn't have them?" He said, "No, he doesn't know what the heck he did with them." And I said, "But Henson should have all that stuff." And he said, "No." He said, "As far as I know, they threw it out years and years ago," which just amazing.
It boggles my mind. Yeah, it's like, terrible. Why would they do that?
No, I guess because they never thought that, the thing would be revived at any point. That for Jim, it was, a one project deal. He saw the movie as being complete. So, I guess they just.
So will you be binging it on Netflix when it comes out then?
I'm sure I will. It'll be fascinating. I've heard really good things. It's like from the people who did work on it and have seen the early rushes. They said it looks incredible, mainly because there's a lot more consistent work for puppeteers in England than there is here in the States. So there's really people who are, really talented and have worked consistently throughout the year on different forms of puppetry. And they said the stuff looks spectacular. So I'm really looking forward to see.
Well, awesome. Well, I'm excited to, I'm looking forward, like you said, it's a prequel connecting the stories. So let's see what they can come up with. And I'm hoping to see it sometime this year. They said 2019. Do you have any more info, like late?
No. I had heard at Toy Fair that in February that it's going to be released in November. And then 2 weeks ago, I was, Marty Robinson has a musical that's going to be performed in Manhattan. It's called All Hallows Eve, and he had like a fundraiser for the musical, and had a showing of the different characters and puppets and drawings and stuff at a gallery in here in Connecticut. And there was a guy there who had worked on the new Dark Crystal, and he said, "Yeah, it's definitely coming out in November." So
All right, we'll keep our eyes open for that release for maybe hopefully around Thanksgiving. We have 4 days to just completely binge something.
I would think because Funko is doing the toys and they're going to want to have toy sales for Christmas, that it'll be released early in November, because if it's too late in November, they'll miss the Christmas toy sales season. So
you're right. Got to get that Black Friday.
Exactly.
Got to get it in there. So yeah,
Exactly.
well, hopefully we'll get early then. I'll be on the lookout for that. So kind of moving forward after Dark Crystal, you got into Fraggle Rock, which you talked about earlier. So what was the transition in getting into this show? It's like one iconic thing to another. You get your steps.
Well, you say iconic now, but we had no idea. I mean, especially like Muppet Show, we knew was, Muppet Show was wildly popular while it was still being shot. So we knew that, Muppet Show was big. And of course, Sesame Street. Nobody knew what the heck HBO was then. It's like cable television. What the heck is cable television? What is HBO? And it's like, we had no clue, and I have to say, I have seen the new Blu-ray series of Fraggle Rock, and they did a beautiful job remastering it. It's just because there was a lot of green screen haze around the puppets with the feathers in their hair, which is very difficult. But the newly remastered thing is just exquisitely beautiful, and in many ways, I think it's the best written thing that Jim ever did. It's just Jocelyn Stevenson who was the head writer, just did a beautiful job with Fraggle Rock. It's funny and touching, and
it was definitely part of my morning routine of watching Fraggle Rock before going off to the bus to get off to school. Get some of my Fraggle Rock, and you had created the character Traveling Matt. Is that right too?
Michael Frith did all the character sketches for the main Fraggles, and then it was up to us to make them three-dimensional puppets. And I think the best thing I did about Traveling Matt was his mustache mechanism, which was, Franz Fozzikas, who everybody called Foz, who did all the radio-controlled Fraggles and did all the mechanisms for Big Bird to Snuffy to like just about every, eye blink mechanism was originated by Foz. And Foz had worked for Bill Baird, and Bill Baird had a marionette studio before Muppets came out. And Foz was just an amazing thing. But one of the things he stressed to me was, when you're building mechanisms, keep them as simple as possible so that if something goes wrong on set, you can easily repair it. He said, if you get something that's really involved and it breaks down, that's, a lot of time wasted, and time is very expensive when you're shooting. So Traveling Matt's mustache was just fur fabric and feathers glued onto two pieces of plastic rod, very thin, like eighth of an inch plastic rod. And then I took a piece of rubber surgical tubing and connected those two pieces of plastic rod, through his nose. And so Dave Goles, when he would push that piece of surgical tubing forward, it would cause his mustache to flick backwards. Or if he pushed it down, it would flick it up. And if he pushed one side, it would go down, or, the other side would go down, just depending on how he touched it. And it was probably the simplest mechanism I ever made, and the most effective, because it adds so much expression to his face and his gestures and what he's trying to get across as to how Traveling Matt, feels about things. And, he's able to give him that quizzical look by pulling on his mustache in one direction or the other. So, yeah, it was
definitely another innovative, concept of coming from you. So another thing too, working on Fraggle Rock, they've been working on a movie for a long time.
That's what I hear.
We're gonna have an actual release.
That's what I hear.
I think 2005 was the official announcement. It's been a little bit, but I'm hoping we get one soon enough.
We'll see. I mean, you never know.
Because we got Dark Crystal, we got Fraggle Rock, and what else we can have coming? Probably another Sesame Street movie. Who knows? All your stuff that you've worked on previously is now getting movies.
Yeah.
So
all these things come
calling your
in
name
like
before too long.
30-year cycles in some ways, because
that's true. Well,
kids, 30 people who were kids 30 years ago, they want to have for their children what they had as kids, which is why Boglins is suddenly all popular again, because so many people who had them 30 years ago were saying to me, there's nothing out there that's as fun as what Boglins was when I was a kid. And he said, they said, why are you making
that's
them?
what I want to get into.
And I have been trying to pitch them. In fact, Super 7, we just signed a licensing deal with Super 7. They're going to be making Halloween buckets for, to carry candy around, but done as Boggling characters.
Oh, nice.
So I'm really excited about that. It should be a nice addition. And we are negotiating with a major toy company to license them. Whether it'll go through or not, I have no idea, because the toy business is a crazy business. It's not always the easiest thing to place a product.
Oh, I bet. Well, like I said, you had transitioned from creating puppets to now you're doing the toys. So what was that transition like? What kind of kickstarted you to go into toys?
Well, mainly because when I was at after we finished doing the first season of Fraggle Rock. I went to Jim and I said, Jim, I think we should really start a toy design and development group here in the workshop, because we could come up with much better toy products than what the toy companies are doing. It's like they would do a Big Bird ride-on and they would just slap, Big Bird stickers on it. And I said, so a Big Bird ride-on should have, make it so that the kid can put his feet on Big Bird's feet and make the legs move up and down, his face should be dimensional on the front, like the Big Bird ride-on should have a beak, it shouldn't just be this, thing where they just put stickers or decals on something, and
pretty much what they do with Star Trek, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I said, there's so many things that we're doing that are so much more innovative than what the toy companies are doing. And he just said to me, Tim, I think it's a great idea. I just don't want to do it. I said, okay. I was just so shocked that he was like, didn't want to go in that direction. But I think Jim was also.
Well, that's when he had his full plate.
Was overwhelmed by how big the company had become, because I don't think he ever wanted to be at Disney. He wanted to just be doing different things. It's like he didn't want to be managing this, enormous company. He wanted to just be coming up with new concepts and new movies and, creating new characters, like, then going back and doing Labyrinth and stuff like that. And I think he was a little overwhelmed by how big Muppets had become. So then they because they had so much staff, they put a bunch of us on freelance, and that's when I started doing toy design and development myself. And Sectaurs was the first toy that we sold. Maureen Trotto and I worked on that together, and it was based on the little fly hand puppet I had made years ago when I was working in Kermit's studio on my own time. And, I had been trying to pitch toy ideas to toy companies, and they kept saying to me, well, we don't know you, we don't want to know you, kind of thing. We don't accept product ideas from outside. So it was really hard to break in. And then finally, I found 7 towns in the back of a toy magazine during Toy Fair, and I called them up and I said, I have a bunch of toy ideas I want to pitch to you. And they said, no, we don't really see ideas from outside people. And I said, oh my God, this is ridiculous. So it's like, I said, I've been working for Muppets for the last 6 years, and I just want to show you. Oh, you were working for Muppets? Oh, well, then you should come in.
The magic words. Yeah, that's all they needed to hear.
That got me in the door. Mm-hmm. And then, so, the fly became Sectaurs, and that was the first big line I worked on.
The Battle of the Sectaurs begins. Heroic Dargon, leader of the forces of good, is ambushed by evil Sectaurs. With the help of his loyal insectoid Dragonflyer, he fights them off. But they're just bait for the real trap. A far more treacherous enemy is waiting. The evil General Spytrax. Will Heroic Dargon be caught in his web? Watch the next episode of Sectaurs by Coleco.
I mean, that they developed that into a whole toy line. They had, like you said, the hand vehicles. They had the animated TV show. Did you watch the TV show at all?
Yeah. Well, what happened was we were originally going to do a stop motion animation movie with live actors jumping, like Harryhausen style, with them jumping on the insects and flying off into space and, doing all this great stuff. And we were 6 weeks into production in California. And then Coleco pulled the plug. Universal had put up half the budget to make the movie, and Coleco pulled the plug, and they said, you guys need to come back to Connecticut. And we did, and because Coleco was based in Hartford, and they said, we can't afford to do the movie. We're just going to do a cartoon series. And we're like going, wait a minute, what the hell is going on here? Because, they had made a fortune on Cabbage Patch dolls, and then later on we found out that they had lost so much money doing Atom Computer that they just never recovered. And, they ended up going bankrupt within, I don't know, maybe 9 months after that or something.
Oh, wow. So they're just cutting corners and slashing budgets everywhere.
Yeah, it's just like they just overextended themselves and, got into an area of the business that they had no, business being in. It's like doing a desktop computer. Yeah, it was a great idea, but they had nobody. They didn't have the staff or the engineering or design, background to produce something like that. And then they released it too early, and it had all these flaws. So, it's like people were just returning them. The thing was just an awful. It was a big mess, to say the least.
Yeah, Coleco had their hands in a lot of things. So I think they should just maybe focus on one or two.
Yeah. They just overdid it. They just overdid it and tried to expand too quickly, in too many directions at once, and just that was that. So that was the end of Sectaurs, and then Boglins had originally was going to be a nemesis for the Sectaurs. And we got Boglins back and then showed it to Mattel, and Mattel got it right away, and that was the whole start of, Boglins.
Over here, I'm a Boglin. Me and my buddies need a place to hide out. Come a little closer. Oh, did I scare you? Oh, I do that so well. If you take us home, we'll kiss your Aunt Martha. We'll eat your peas. And we hope you know lots of girls. Hey, the name's Boglins, each sold separately, and we're looking for good homes. Maybe yours.
Even Wayne's husband, Dwayne Langenwalter, had designed the box and the crate, and I had sculpted and done mechanisms for the Boglins, and they just it just clicked. It's like they got it right away, and the design of Dwarfed Boglin is very similar to the original Boglin that I did, which You can see all this stuff I have a lot of this stuff on Instagram, like the whole history of all the different toys I've done throughout the years from, all the different toy companies.
Oh, I definitely had my Boglins in my toy box back in the day, running around scaring my sister, chasing her around. So she's not too fond of them as much as I am, but definitely love some Boglins. And the box, like you said, it was all, the box was intriguing to look at. It's like a little cage for the Boglin, and then just the whole hand concept thing that was it's pretty rare. And another thing too, I think, am I right when I read that you kind of were basing it off like there are no toys for like gremlins or critters or like any of those kind of small critter monsters?
No, it wasn't that at all. I wasn't really thinking. We had already sold Boglins to Mattel before Gremlins came out. And when Maureen and I went to see Gremlins that summer in the theater, we went, oh, well, that's the end. If they come out with Gremlin toys, it'll eclipse, what Boglins is. But they hadn't sold the license for Gremlins. And the Gremlin toys didn't come out to like a year after that. So we had that whole year of Boglin sales and to get ourselves established in the market. So, it was just, very lucky timing that it worked out that way, that we were there. But Boglins was really much more based on the work I did on Dark Crystal than anything else.
Yeah, and he says more of they were supposed to be originally a villain for the Sectaurs. So but that was the direction that Coleco wanted to take it in was so terrible. It didn't look anything like what we presented them, and it was just the rendition they did of it was awful, just like awful. I was so happy when we got the rights to it back, and we knew that it wasn't going to go anywhere because Mattel did a much, much better job, much more true to what we had conceived. So. And you guys just did a re-release of Boglins back in 2017?
I started 3 years ago. The first thing I did was with Clutter. We did a series of mini Boglins, and then people started saying, "Well, why don't you bring it out?" And I was like, "Okay," but I was like, we have been actively trying to get a toy company to pick it up for like the last 4 years, and so it's been a struggle, and we'll see. It's like. Because it's been taking so long, it's like I no longer believe whether it's going to go through or not. But in the meantime, I really am enjoying doing it myself, and just playing around with new ideas. Like I'm almost finished sculpting the new one, which is basically what I say that they're little small Boglins that are trapped in the frame of eternity. So they're literally a whole series of mini Boglins that you'll be able to move with your fingers, all 5 fingers, within a picture frame. It's like they're frozen in the frame, but it's going to be the same flexible material, so you can manipulate it and have them squirming around within the frame. So there's some preliminary sculpt on Instagram, and I'm almost finished with it. I'll post some new photos probably this week or tomorrow.
Well, I'll tell you that the hype is still out there, because all of the retro stores that I go to here in the Denver area and most other places, there's definitely a dedicated little section for Boglins. So they're out there still. People are still buying them up. They're still putting them out there on display.
The prices are crazy. So
it's kind of almost like those Funko Pops. They're kind of, people just want to get all those characters, multiples, things like that.
Yeah.
So like I said, the hype is still out there. So the most recent one that you've been working on, is it the TOTIMS as well? Is that the most recent line you've worked on?
Well, TOTIMS was a vinyl figure that I had done with Toy Art Gallery. I've been so busy with Boglins since I reissued them. I really haven't had time to go back and work on TOTIMS so much. But we'll see. Who knows? It's like my problem is I have more ideas than I have time. So it's like getting stuff, out in, in the marketplace is always, a challenge, one way or the other, whether I'm sculpting or producing or designing or, whatever, and I just finished doing a TV commercial. I did a puppet for a TV commercial for Sling TV. So,
well, I'm sure
that was a lot of fun.
I'll see it blasted in between one of my shows at full volume, probably 8 or 9 times in a row. That's usually how Sling does their commercials.
Yeah. No, it's a really cute. They're really clever and they're funny. They're nice double entendre stuff about slinging. So
nice.
It was really good.
We'll have to keep an eye out. Probably we'll see it before too long. So getting into your more recent stuff, what are some current projects that you're working on right now?
Well, I'm just getting stuff ready for 5 Points. I did an anglerfish puppet that I took to, I think the first time he appeared was at London Toy Con. And then I had him at Monsterpalooza. I sold every single one I had with me. I will have the new anglerfish Boglin with the floating eyeball in his antenna. So it'll have a moving eyeball at 5 Points. And I'll have the new, the frame of eternity there. And I will have the new arch enemy of the mini Boglin King is Clore. I will have him at 5 Points. So there'll be lots of, really great stuff at 5 Points.
Well, cool, yeah. And so you got some 5 Points coming up. Hopefully, some other Comic Cons closer to where the listeners are as well.
Yeah, I'm in Detroit for what's the name of that one? I'm blanking on it. It's not Incredicon. It's something else.
Well, I have to put in a good word to sneak you into Denver.
Like that. It's in Detroit in July 20th, and I have another one the end of August, and it's hard for me to keep track of them all. But.
Well, cool. We'll get them all. We'll get everything listed down so people can keep an eye on everything. But other than that, Tim, that was everything I wanted to go over for the episode today. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be on the podcast today, and also thank you for bringing all of these amazing characters to life for us kids to enjoy growing up. Like, it really made a difference
my pleasure.
Through
My
Dark
pleasure.
Crystal, Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, like everything in between. We can't thank you enough. So and we can't wait to see more as well. More Boglins, more of everything. So we'll be on the lookout for new releases and things like that. So let the listeners know where they can follow you online to keep updated on all these projects.
Yeah, my website is TOTIMS.com, which is TOTIMS, and on Instagram it's Tim Clarke Toys, and Clarke has an E at the end. And I'm on Facebook also. It's Tim Clarke Toys, and on Tumblr it's Tim Clarke Toys. So, yeah, I'm on all those spots, and I think Instagram is the one that I get the biggest response from of all of them. So that's been great for getting the word out there as to what's coming out next and what I'm working on.
Oh yeah, you got to keep in the cycle with us young kids. It's either Facebook or it's Instagram, then it's Twitter. It's like I can't keep up. I can't even keep up. So, but yes, Instagram has been huge help.
I have to say that the great thing about doing the shows is seeing a little, both boys and girls reacting to Boglins the same way they did 30 years ago. Like when they first see it moving on my hand, they're like, what the heck is that? And they just get drawn over. Like when I was at Dragon Con, this woman was waiting in a line across the aisle from where I was showing the new Boglins, and this little boy looked over at me, and he just started walking towards me, And I said, "Here, would you like to try it?" And he just shook his head yes, and then suddenly his mother realized he wasn't around, and she looked across the hallway and she saw him, and she walked over immediately. She said, "What are you doing?" And his first reaction was just to turn around and bite her on the arm, and she just like shrieked, like, "What are you doing?" It was like, well, that's my customer right there. You know, it's like, that's the way every kid, reacts. And they were in line to go to some panel discussion on Star Wars, and he was just like, no, I think I would rather have one of these. It was really good.
Well, you started young.
Wonderful.
You might get yourself a young puppeteer in the making right there. So, like I said, hopefully we'll see you at a Comic-Con near one of us before too long. But again, Tim, can't thank you enough for coming on today. Everybody else, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Be Kind and Rewind podcast. Tune in every Throwback Thursdays for new episodes of the podcast. Subscribe and rate us on all podcast apps, including Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, iHeart Radio, and Infirmary Media Podcast Network. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Be Kind Rewind Pod for all of your nostalgic needs. So thanks, and be excellent to each other.
Infirmary Media.